Shaib. I'm the Senior Director for Communications here at the Middle East Institute. Thank you for joining today's On the Record briefing session. Today's discussion will focus on Trump's trip to the Middle East. President Donald Trump is embarking on a visit to the Gulf region on his first official foreign trip of his second term. He's currently in Saudi Arabia, but he will also travel to Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. The choice of destinations is significant. Among his goals, he's seeking $1 trillion worth of Saudi investments in the United States, but geopolitics are also on the agenda. And he's expected to discuss Iran, regional security, the Gaza war, Syria, and more while on the trip. With us to discuss it all, we're joined by Daniel Benaim, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Arabian Peninsula Affairs and Associate Fellow at the Middle East Institute, as well as Ibrahim Al-Assil, Senior Fellow at MEI and a Professorial Lecturer at George Washington University. Thank you both for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. We'll have a Q&A segment during the session, so if you'd like to ask a question, please use the raise hand function in Zoom, and if selected, we'll unmute you and you'll direct your question to one or both of our panelists. Your questions can also be submitted in writing via the Q&A chat box here on Zoom. Let's get right into it. Dan, let me start with you. You have just returned from a trip to the Gulf region, and you know the Gulf pretty well. What do you think success looks like for Trump and his team? And likewise, what do you think the leadership in Saudi, Qatar, and the UAE are hoping to accomplish from this trip?
Well, Zaina, thanks so much. And it's great to be with you and all the folks out there. What does success look like for President Trump? I think, first of all, he wants to showcase himself as a leader on the world stage. I mean, these are the partners that President Trump wants. It's really striking. This is the second time now he's broken with tradition and gone not to Canada or to Mexico or to NATO ally in Europe, but to the Gulf region. And there's not just pomp and circumstance on this trip, but there's real warmth and kind of strategic investment beneath it when it comes to relations with leaders in this region. And I think the contrast with other regions is palpable, and these are incredibly important partners for the United States. So I think there are real opportunities there to advance our national interests. I think that from the beginning, the president has put the Gulf at the center of his approach to regional and even global problem solving to a striking degree. You've got Gaza talks that are happening in Doha. You've got Iran talks that are happening in Oman. You've got efforts to achieve Russia-Ukraine talks in Saudi Arabia. You've got talks with the Houthis through the Omanis. Apparently now we may have talks with the leader of Syria and others happening through Saudi Arabia. So he's looked to this region as a kind of key broker and key conduit and key player in regional diplomacy. But that said, I think when he looks for success here, the major measure of success of this trip for the president seems to be, to a striking degree, bilateral economic relations. Now, you might think that a trip like this, given what I've told you about the central role that the Gulf is playing in the president's diplomacy, would be to showcase success on these various files. But I think diplomacy is hard. It's hard to get the Russians to make serious concessions on Ukraine. Gaza, in many ways, is in more difficult shape than it was the day the president took over. Normalization is further from reach, let's say, and to a surprising extent, doesn't seem to be the centerpiece of this trip to Saudi Arabia. So I think what is instead the center here are these bilateral deals. And that suits regional leaders, I think, quite well. You're talking about a group of leaders who are much younger than they were 15 years ago in terms of the aggregate leadership across the Gulf, who expect to see the diversification away from oil-dominated economies happen in their lifetime and expect to be held accountable for success in that diversification effort in their lifetime. So it's not a future concern, it's a present concern, and who are in many cases making significant societal changes in their own countries that are remarkable and driving them forward. So they're interested in this, and they want to see a calm and peaceful region that will allow for their domestic economic transformations. The president wants to see economic benefits brought home for the American people, even more at a time when he's engaged in economic conflict around the world over the last several months, and wants to show that the American economy and American businesses are the partners of choice, and that we're the investment destination of choice. Take all of that and layer over the president's style, and you have the makings of a kind of splashy set of bilateral announcements of economic deals. It's very important that you do have economic leaders here from the United States as well. You can look beneath those deals and see a lot of important work that remains to be done to achieve the kind of follow through that we want, and some important policy steps that maybe we can come back to later. But I think to a striking extent, the centerpiece is economic, but it doesn't mean you can avoid the regional issues either. I'm sure that the president will hear about Gaza. We got very encouraging news of the return of the last living American hostage, but we're still at an ominous and difficult point on the ground in Gaza with a potential Israeli invasion coming up. I'm sure that will be a topic everywhere, as will be Iran and the Houthis and the range of regional issues that confront the region as it is today, even as the president and the rulers of the Gulf look to build the economies of the future and hopefully make some significant progress in the days ahead.
Thank you, Dan, for that overview. All right, let's turn to Ibrahim now. Ibrahim, as Dan just mentioned, the region has changed significantly since Trump's last trip to Saudi 4 years ago. Saudi has signed a peace deal with Iran. The Gaza war continues. There's new leadership in Damascus that is pushing for the U.S. to lift sanctions. What are the regional security issues that are going to be on the table, and what outcomes might we expect from these visits?
That's a great question. Thanks, Dana, for having me. It's great to be with you to discuss this issue. And the region has indeed changed much since the last visit. President Trump changed as well. The administration changed, and the United States changed. We live in a different world today, and what they're looking for is similar to what President Trump is looking for when it comes to something tangible. I think everyone is trying to get good optics out of these meetings and something tangible for the Gulf states. They are looking for defense assurances, they are looking for tech access, and they are looking for powerful US signaling that they have strong ties with the Gulf. And that's mainly happening, as Dan just mentioned, on a bilateral level. So they all agree on what I just mentioned, but each one of these Gulf countries, they have a different priority or a different approach. For Saudi Arabia, it wants to highlight their leadership and their leading role. And I believe that's one of the reasons why they are hosting the GCC summit tomorrow, to show that Saudi Arabia is a leader in the Gulf and in the region. I don't expect there will be structural discussions with the GCC as a group, but it's more of a signaling. I believe most of the deals will be bilateral. For Saudis, they want more defense agreements and arm sales. For the UAE, they want more tech access to knowledge and access to products that in AI chips that they usually don't have. And for Qatar to show its role as a mediator again, that it has strong relationship with Washington, D.C., and increase to all of them their business relationship with the United States. So numbers and pledges, that's the main focus of this visit, to pledge a huge number of investments and probably to reach new MOUs and agreements. Many of them probably won't be binding, but I think the signaling itself, the optics, are very significant on this trip.
Ibrahim, I want to stay with you for a second. I do want to talk about the potential meeting between Trump and Syria's new president, Ahmed al-Shara, while in Saudi Arabia. So there were press reports that Shara was trying to lure Trump to take this meeting by inviting him to build a Trump Tower in Damascus. And giving the U.S. access to Syria's oil and gas and potential normalization with Israel. What kind of outcome is Shara looking for, and what's in it for Trump?
That's a great question, and yes, the Trump Tower. I think that's now is the signature move by any side trying to actually have a good relationship with the administration, which highlights the business mentality, the transactional nature of the relationship, and the bilateral approach. That's always the key in trying to reach out to the U.S. Administration today. I think Al Sharia doesn't have much to offer because for the United States, Syria, when it comes to the economic side, if we want to talk about business deals, it's not a very, very attractive market because while Syria is on a different trajectory today, it still has very long path for the rule of law, to create a good environment to attract investments and capitals. But geopolitically, Syria has a lot to offer. And I think that's what Al-Shara is also focusing on what type of relationships he will have with his neighbors, including Israel and the Saudis. They have been working so hard on this issue, on opening channels between Washington, D.C. and the government in Syria, because the priority for Saudi Arabia today is to stabilize the region. That contributes to the Vision 2030, to economic growth and prosperity. And for that, they need Syria. Even during the Assad regime time, they tried to reach out to Assad at the end because they couldn't afford having Syria as a black hole in the region. Now Assad is gone. Iran lost its influence in Syria. You mentioned Iran. And while I want to highlight that, you mentioned that the agreement between Riyadh and Tehran, it was significant, but it's surface level. Like that, the distrust is still the key word for that relationship. To conclude on this question, I don't know if the meeting will happen because also there are different centers of power and figures within the US administration today and the White House who are very strongly against this idea. But also the region, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and other also figures in the administration are pushing more towards an opening with the government in Damascus because they want to shape the moment. And I think that's smart and important. And to make sure that the United States doesn't miss this opportunity of also having Syria that's oriented more towards the West and on a trajectory for peace, stability, and economic growth.
All right, Dan, a question for you. Israel was left out of this trip's itinerary. How significant is that, especially in light of the fact that the US has already restarted talks with Iran, they've reached a deal with the Houthis, and they've announced that they will engage in direct talks with Hamas. Is it significant that Trump is not going to Israel?
Well, I think these things are always hard to tell from the outside exactly what's going on inside the relationship between these two leaders who know each other very well, going back a long way. Um, the Prime Minister of Israel already had two visits to the United States over the first 100 or so days of the administration in the Oval Office. I would say it's pretty clear that there are, on the major issues confronting the region, uh, there's a little bit of a difference in approach when it comes to diplomacy with Iran. President Trump has been pretty clear that he wants to see a deal. He's willing to consider other alternatives, but he wants to make a deal. Now, exactly what kind of deal he's willing to accept, they've been a bit less clear about, and that's something that he'll have to clarify going forward. However, um, they've been clear that they want to see diplomacy, and that Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that only the Libya model will be adequate, and otherwise no deal would be better, and that's a significant difference. President Trump's approach to the Houthis, which didn't solve for the Houthi strikes on Israel, is another case where there seem to be some differences. Um, I think, to me, the question as it pertains to this trip is really whether the leaders of the region at a quiet moment are able to persuade Trump to invest more in looking for an approach to Gaza that will avoid the coming offensive and create a renewed ceasefire and improve humanitarian access. And while the Gulf states are not all in exactly the same place regarding all of the next steps, I think they're just about all agreed that that represents something important. And while it might be looked at as a blockage on the road to normalization, I think for all the Gulf states, it's something much more important to their governments and their people. So I expect that that will come up. And they will have a chance to hear from the Gulf on this issue as well. But I think the partnership between Israel and the United States is strong and longstanding, and I expect they'll have plenty of chances to hear from Israeli leadership, even if they're not a stop on this trip.
Absolutely. All right, let's open the floor to questions. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A chat box, or feel free to use the raise hand function, and we'll do our best to get to as many as possible. While we wait for questions, I have a question for Ibrahim. Ibrahim, let's discuss some of the energy and investment issues on the agenda.
Mhm.
How do you see Saudi Arabia responding to Trump's request that they cut oil prices? And in the UAE, the leaders are hoping to reach an agreement that gives them greater access to American microchips. What deals can we expect to see on the energy, technology, and AI front?
Indeed, we're expecting deals on energy, on defense, on aviation, on tech and AI. And to start with the energy sector, there is a convergence at this point between the Saudi interest and the American interest in having lower oil prices, but that's temporary. And when it comes to pricing oil for the Saudis, Saudi comes first, naturally. And today it's aligned because also for Saudis, it allows them at this point when they are lowering the prices because they are the largest producer to actually get larger share in the market and to punish some of those who were exceeding the quota of their production, in particular Kazakhstan. But I think that won't last long because at the end, Saudi Arabia wants to sell its oil with higher prices. That would fund many of their very ambitious projects and Vision 2030. But I think they are using this decision now smartly to actually appeal to President Trump and tell him that they are doing that for him, but it's not only for him. And I think they will diverge again at some point when it comes to the oil prices. For AI, the United Arab Emirates, they want access, they want better access to, or an increase in the access to advanced AI chips, especially from NVIDIA. They want less restrictions on transferring the know-how and the knowledge to the UAE, but Saudi Arabia is now also joining that world, and we expect to see, because this for the intra GCC dynamics, some Saudi UAE competition on the AI front. Finally, on aviation, we're also expecting a huge deal with Boeing from Qatar Airlines. 100 jets, probably they might go up to 150 or 200s. It's very important for President Trump, where you started with talking with Dan about what success looks like. I think this is very important for Trump to show that he has economic credibility and he is bringing some jobs and deals for the United States, especially that China stopped buying Boeing. So this is important for Boeing. Emirates Airlines is actually the largest buyer of Boeing worldwide, but usually they announce their deals in November in the air show, which happens every 2 years. It didn't happen last year. It will happen this year, but who knows? They might actually announce something during this trip.
Dan, I saw you nodding. Anything to add?
Yeah, look, I think the economic deal making here is really at the center of the public presentation of the trip and at the center of the president's narrative of the trip. I think there will be big numbers and glitzy announcements and also real deals. And the question will be a matter of follow through. Two matters of U.S. foreign economic policy and national security policy that I have been watching that I think are quite interesting when it comes to this moment. One we were just talking about, which is the global diffusion of advanced semiconductors. There was a policy put in place by the previous administration in its last weeks to regulate the diffusion of advanced microchips around the world that was due to come into effect this week. It was rescinded at the end of last week. So while we may get significant announcements on new AI partnerships, there's a real question about what kind of regulatory regime and safeguards and scale will be attached to this deal. There are significant policy issues like the risk of leakage to China and safety and administration and, frankly, competition in some cases with US firms as you begin to consider larger and larger numbers of chips. It's a really dynamic policy area, and it's at the moment a kind of very ill-defined and policy area. So on the back end of these announcements, it'll be very interesting to understand what kinds of rules and expectations go along with these chips. I do think that the U.S. Gulf AI cooperation is something that's very advantageous to the United States for a number of reasons, can help the U.S. Win in the AI race. It's going to be incredibly capital intensive, so there's room for investment in the United States. As a matter of great power competition, I think the United States should want the Gulf and the U.S. ecosystem, and this is an important inflection point and a chance to really definitively move in that direction. But the devil is in the details on all of it. The second policy issue that I just wanted to flag was the question of investment inside the United States. I think there's two things really that the Gulf states are looking for as they are poised to make major investments into the United States. The first is some streamlining of the process of national security review of investments made into the United States, what's called the CFIUS process, Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. The Trump administration announced an executive order to streamline that process. I think there are ways that it can be streamlined responsibly to make it more predictable, more timely, and clearer in terms of its expectations for foreign investors. It's been a source of significant frustration. It's also an important process that can protect U.S. national security. So getting that right and striking that right balance is incredibly important. And the other thing that Gulf states, especially Saudi Arabia, are looking for is inbound investment. A lot of the focus here is on investment into the United States by Gulf countries, but Saudi Arabia in particular has invested in attracting, becoming the kind of economy that can attract this kind of investment. So the arrival of these major American business leaders to Saudi Arabia to engage in kind of two-way partnerships that bring investment to Saudi Arabia and help attract additional investment, I think is incredibly important to the economic modernization agenda that's underway there. So those are a few policy areas to watch.
All right. I have a question from Kate Winston, and after that, we'll go to Zahir Sahlul, who has his hand raised. Kate once said, the White House announced today that the US DOE and the Ministry of Energy of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia have agreed to cooperate in the field of energy, focusing on the potential for innovation, development, financing, and deployment of energy infrastructure. Do you have any idea what that means and which energy sectors could be included? We can start with you, Dan, and then we'll go to Ibrahim.
I have to be honest, I read the same press release announcement and was struck by its vagueness. There's a lot of important bilateral energy cooperation ranging from energy exploration to minerals, which is an emerging area of focus within Vision 2030, where there is a tremendous amount we can do with Saudi Arabia, to the more controversial issue of nuclear cooperation. It seemed like an MOU to agree to cooperate in a broad number of areas without a particularly tangible outcome attached, which suggests to me that it was kind of a recognition that this is an important area of our partnership where we're working hard and that some of the results are still to come. My hope would be that it also includes continued work on clean energy, but I know that that's been less of a focus on the US side of late.
Ibrahim?
I agree with Dan that I don't know much about the details of this statement, but some of these statements, just the signaling is as important as the details to show that the strong relationship, and also to give President Trump something for domestic conception, and to give him the economic credibility that he needs at this point after the tariff war with China.
That's great. And I can say that as having been a bureaucrat fairly recently, sometimes an MOU like this will come into being, and part of its purpose will be to encourage the bureaucracies to flesh it out going forward, and to empower them to work on issues that are priorities for the leaders, even if there's not a readily baked deliverable to come out of the oven today.
All right. Zahar, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Zaina, and thank you, MEI. The question is about Syria. I've been in Syria 3 times since the fall of the Assad regime. Actually, I met Ibrahim over there one time, and the economic situation is horrible. Half of the country is destroyed. There are a lot or many refugees are coming back. The estimate is about 1.3 million have already returned, refugees and IDPs. And the UN is expecting 3.5 million IDPs and refugees to go back to their cities by the end of this year. So, in order to have any meaningful return of refugees and stability in Syria, there should be lifting of sanctions on Syria. What do your guests think about the potential lifting of sanctions based on the trip of President Trump to the Gulf? And the second question, how is the gestures from the new new Syrian government about the United States is perceived by the Arab public, positive, negative? These are the 2 questions.
Thank you. Just before we answer them, an anonymous attendee is writing to me saying that Trump just lifted sanctions on Syria in his concluding remarks. So no, I don't know if it happened or not. We'll just but what would the is there potential to lift sanctions, and what would that mean for Syria? Ibrahim, you want to start?
Sure. So yes, and I connect Dr. Sahlur's question to probably our colleague Wael as well, while Zayed is asking about sanctions and the easing of them. I think Syria today is there is a huge opportunity for the United States in Syria on different levels. One of them is that we've seen that different administrations were interested in our partners and allies in the region sharing the burden and contributing more. And now the region is saying, we want to share the burden. We want, especially when we talk about Saudi Arabia, that they want to do more in Syria. They want to stabilize Syria. They want to anchor Syria economically and help. Because if Syria is stabilized, that would really contribute not only to stabilizing the region geopolitically, but also to the economic ambition of the Gulf. Many of the visions like 2030 and their diversification, they need the region to be stable. They need to be able to have different projects and pipelines and goods transit from the Gulf to Turkey and Europe and vice versa. So that's why Syria is extremely important. Add to that the millions of refugees in Jordan and Lebanon and Turkey. So stabilizing Syria is key for the Gulf states. And Saudi Arabia in particular has been working so hard on this issue, on explaining that to their American counterparts, on highlighting this major issue, and on acting as the gateway for Syria to the West and to the United States. And I think for the question of the gestures by the Syrian government, by the Arab public and governments, I think they are being read positively so far. There are so many challenges, and there is a lot of distrust with specifically if we talk about Iraq. I think the relationship between Damascus and Baghdad is extremely complicated and needs a lot of work. But I think by Gulf states, we've seen even the United Arab Emirates moved more positively, and now they are mediating between Syria and Israel to de-escalate and make sure there is no major escalation and trying to see the opportunity there. And I think that's very important because such a geopolitical opening and opportunity when it comes to the Syrian case, this is something that happens once every many decades. And while I see why the United States is not very involved in Syria, realizing that they are a major obstacle for the region to do what they want to do is very important. So easing sanctions or at least allowing the Gulf to operate in Syria is very important. And let's see if the meeting between President Trump and President al-Shara will happen or not in Saudi. This is very important.
So the journalist in me was waiting for two sources to confirm the news. It is now confirmed. Trump did announce the removal of sanctions, and thank you to our board member who fed me the news. Dan, would you like to comment on the Syrian
This is a
sanctions?
big thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
First, I think Ibrahim nailed it, and I agreed with his comments entirely. The one thing I'd add is that U.S. sanctions in Syria go back like 40 years and are a very complex thicket that includes legislative sanctions that can only be removed by Congress over time and can be eased by the executive, counterterrorism sanctions, and a full range of sanctions for different conduct. I'd be curious to know which sanctions President Trump has removed, but I think the removal of just about any of them is very important. There need to be clear expectations from the Syrian government as we move forward, but my sense is that the greater risk at this moment of opportunity lies in doing too little rather than doing too much to make outreach. And I do think that the U.S. talks often about burden sharing, and this file where the Gulf's interests are so pronounced and investment is so pronounced, it would be a great place to do some of that burden sharing. And the most helpful thing that the United States can do is create an enabling sanctions environment for that to happen. So I think that's a constructive step.
I totally agree. And you know, we usually, I mean, the Middle East, there are always heartbreaking news. So sometimes it's good to be on an event discussing the Middle East and then some good news come out. So it's great to share this moment with you.
Absolutely. I do have a question also on Syria from Hosan Ibrahim. Hosan says also, what will the future of partnership with SDF and the U.S. With the U.S. and the West in northeastern Syria be, and will the conditions on inclusive transitional government and removing foreign fighters from government positions and army be kept in exchange for removing sanctions? Obviously, we just heard the news, so we don't have all the information, but Ibrahim, you want to...
I will briefly address this point also from the Gulf angle and perspective. I think for the Gulf, for Saudi Arabia, and for the United Arab Emirates, having a good deal with the Kurds is essential for them. And that also would help regionally because that would also assure the Israelis when they see that the government in Damascus is opening to actually being more inclusive. The Turkish-Israeli tension will decrease. The trust by the Gulf capitals will increase, and that's very, very important. And if the other scenario is to happen, if there is violence and clashes between Damascus and the SDF in any scenario, I think that would be consequentially very bad for Syria and for the potential, because lifting sanctions is one thing and attracting investments and reconstruction is something else. So now, if sanctions are removed, I hope we know the details soon, and I hope that's constructive. Then the other challenge will be the rule of law and peace in Syria. If investments are not going to come, if they see that there is a renewed cycle of violence with the Kurds or with the Druze or with the Alawites or with any side inside Syria.
All right. What we have a question from what is that? What is the likelihood of Syria being part of a broader regional agreement? Dan, this is for you. Broader regional agreement, I assume we're talking about the Abraham Accords.
You know, it's a great question from my friend Weil. I think it's hard for me to imagine that that will happen anytime extremely soon. But on the other hand, it seems to be pretty clearly being dangled by the leadership as a way to create the right tone for a good relationship with the United States. So stranger things have happened. This is a diplomatic relationship that was almost consummated under very different circumstances a couple of times over the last 30 years. There's a lot of issues to resolve between Israel and Syria regarding the communities near the border and, frankly, regarding the border itself and disputed border areas. So the idea of a resolution of all of these claims is probably far off, but the idea of important movement down this path and the reports that there's already been some initial dialogue brokered by the Gulf speak to a direction of travel here that could be very constructive, even if the final glistening destination might be some ways down the road.
All right. Ibrahim, anything to add?
I think Dan covered that very well.
Sorry, we're in violent agreement here on most of this.
It's something to disagree on.
It does look, well, he's telling me that it does look like Secretary Rubio will be the one meeting with Shara. So we'll see. It might surprise us all. All right, so
Still a significant gesture and step on the part of the United States, and reflects a significant entreaty from Saudi Arabia to make clear that this is important to them, that this happened as part of this trip. So it's still a very welcome step, even if it's not the president himself.
absolutely. And then I do want to talk about Saudi Arabia as well. They did sign arms deals today to the tune of $154 billion. Last year, we were talking about a historic defense and trade agreement, and it was on the verge of being signed. However, negotiations were put on hold due to Saudi Arabia's insistence that Israel commits to a path towards a Palestinian state. Where do those talks stand now? And can Trump succeed in pushing a deal with Saudi, a defense deal with Saudi Arabia across the finish line? Dan, can I start with you?
Sure, it's a great question, and in January, I would have suspected that achieving such a deal would be an early priority of the Trump administration. It seems to me, and I'm always mindful of the fact that those closest to the action sometimes don't speak, and those who speak the most are furthest from the action. It would seem to me that this hasn't necessarily been a priority to try to fast track this effort. And in many ways, it looks further today than it did in January. The previous administration and Secretary Blinken has spoken about this. Basically had the bilateral components of a deal wrapped up and was looking to define the Palestinian component that was necessary for Saudi Arabia, and especially necessary post-October 7th. You saw a ceasefire in Gaza just before inauguration, and then you saw that ceasefire collapse, and you saw the renewal of conflict. I think that we're still at a point where it looks like solving the issue of Gaza and finding serious progress toward a two-state solution, if not a two-state solution itself, is fundamental for Saudi Arabia. And it just doesn't seem like that's at the center of this trip, which frankly is a surprise when you look at the historic priorities of Donald Trump and the administration and his legacy being attached to the Abraham Accords. So I think in the absence of real progress toward expanding the Abraham Accords on this trip, people are trying to figure out what can be done to kind of warm the path for if and when folks are ready. And that includes cooperation on nuclear issues. It includes cooperation on defense issues. And Saudi Arabia, the areas of defense that are contemplated are areas where Saudi Arabia can certainly use the upgrade and the partnership with the United States that those sales represent, whether it's the kind of Air Force and air-to-air defense and missiles that are used to shoot down missiles and drones of the kind that Saudi Arabia faced from the Houthis in recent years and from others, frankly, or maritime security to get to a point where we have a more shared burden and more of a shared vision for security in the Red Sea and in the Strait of Hormuz. To border security, where there's serious work to do to find a secure and professional way to make sure that Saudi Arabia can secure its borders from incursion, consistent with modern standards. So I think these are areas where there's real work to do, and it's very encouraging to me to see that partnership deepen in the form of these efforts. And I think that that kind of thing speaks to the strength of our partnership. It's in no way a substitute for a historic, groundbreaking, region remaking diplomatic deal. But it does say that this is a very important partnership, that we're looking for the moment of opportunity to upgrade that partnership when we can, and that while that opportunity isn't ripe today, we do want to continue to build in these areas. I do think that the decision to put this issue on the back burner and allow other regional crises to play out is based on an assumption that there will be time to come back to it later and make good on the promise that we saw to get this done, that we saw before October 7th, and frankly, that we saw after, when it looked like we might achieve a more rapid resolution to the conflict in Gaza. Time is maybe the most underrated element of international relations, and the idea that you can park this and expect it to be available to you when you're ready maybe involves a good bit of wishful thinking. So it may be that the Trump administration tries to come back to it in the future, and I think that's welcome. But time is a dangerous factor in international relations and should never be taken for granted.
Absolutely. Ibrahim, Washington has had significant concerns in the past over Gulf partnerships with Chinese companies and the use of Chinese tech, something countries have taken steps to address. How is that likely to factor in here?
Yes, they've taken some steps to address. I suspect that this will remain an issue for the future because the Gulf, they certainly want good and powerful relationship with the United States, but they also want a good relationship with China. And they are hedging, and they don't want to pull into one direction or become a part of a confrontation or a polarized world. Big part of the growth the Gulf achieved was because of the global economic system. And they are invested in that, and they see that their model and their prosperity requires China and the United States, requires them to be partnered with both on different levels and in different realms, more economically with China, economically, security and military with, and culturally with the United States, but also they don't want to contribute to a polarized world. So I think this issue will continue to be always in the background. China is always in the background of these talks with the United States. But when it comes specifically to the issue of know-how or advanced technology, the semiconductors, the AI chips, that's where they do need to show commitment to the United States to be able to have access to that tech.
Yeah, I think that's right. The United States in general doesn't ask our partners to choose between us and China, but when it comes to the absolute bleeding edge of technology, there are important choices to make as to how deeply enmeshed you want to be in the U.S. tech ecosystem and what steps you're willing to take to make sure that our most advanced technology, our most advanced semiconductors don't end up leaking inadvertently to China. It's a real issue. It's a serious issue. It's a persistent issue. The removal of some of the regulations that were designed to address these issues doesn't obviate the need to have the kinds of discussions, either bilaterally or globally, to make sure that countries have a clear set of expectations regarding the way that they use the chips that they do get, and just the paramount importance that the United States puts on this issue. Issues like in whose custody are these chips? What's the chain of custody? Who has access to these chips inside a given facility? Or is the facility run by a U.S. Company? Is it run by a Gulf company? How is it certified to be secure? These kinds of issues are not particularly partisan in the United States. They were fiercely debated under the Biden administration. I suspect they'll be fiercely debated in the Trump administration. So even if you can expect a more forward lean when it comes to the big deals that are announced. I think these questions are all waiting to be answered in the implementation of each of these deals, so that even as the large print gives, the small print will have to take away to some extent and look at the finer elements to make sure that the deals really do meet U.S. security requirements and advance U.S. national interests. I think that's a necessary part of the kind of big deals that we're envisioning being successful.
Dan, I do have a question for you. There are different actors in the Trump administrations that have made it at times difficult to figure out what the U.S. priorities are vis-a-vis the region or really the world at times. What do you think, from your assessment, what would you say the priorities of this administration are when it comes to the Middle East?
You know, it's a great question. I think we are all figuring this out in real time, which is endemic, frankly, to any early administration, but particularly endemic to some. You're certainly seeing some of those priorities play out now, in the sense that you're looking at commercial advantage, bilateral deal making, these sort of warm leader level relations. These are all, being prioritized in the way that this trip is taking shape. I think that you've seen the Trump administration put a priority on achieving a kind of more limited set of U.S. responsibilities in the region and the world, and then attacking them aggressively, usually using hard power rather than soft power to do it, whether you're talking about the Houthis accepting a deal that has a far more limited set of responsibilities when it comes to Israel's security or to global shipping than the kinds of deals that another administration might have accepted, or when it comes to dismantling the USAID and some of the aid and assistance that we've had. I think they're trying to do fewer things, and they're trying to do them more forcefully. And they're looking to partners to fill in the gaps in many cases. So I think, having a strong set of partnerships with the Gulf and with Israel is absolutely a priority. I would say there are three big deals hanging out there, all of which I imagine in one way or another are very tempting to the president to try to solve and write his legacy. The first is the Iran nuclear deal, which it's important to note was something the Gulf states opposed vehemently 10 years ago for a variety of reasons, and now pretty much, I think, as best I can tell, stand squarely behind, seeing as a building block of regional calm. They built their own relationships with Iran, and they want to see the United States do the same to lower the odds of regional war. So that's one. The second is the normalization of Saudi and Israel and all the bilateral agreements and inducements that go along with that, which we've covered. And the third is some kind of a ceasefire, an enduring day-after arrangement for Gaza, which I think just looks further away. But those are the three big legacy-defining issues, as I can see them, that the president inherited on day one. And it seems to me that, at least so far, they've prioritized racing forward with Iran and been willing to put the normalization issue on the back burner as they try to find the right footing to get to a moment to reach an end to the Gaza war, which I don't think they've yet applied full pressure to do.
All right. Ibrahim, anything to add?
I would probably just inject two other points into this great analysis by Dan. One of them is how concerned the Gulf is about the West Bank, because also they see that would actually prevent any trajectory in the future for a Palestinian state. And also they are concerned that would destabilize, if there is a unilateral decision by Israel to annex like the West Bank or totally destabilize the situation, that would also destabilize Jordan. And then it will be like trying to stabilize Syria while Jordan get destabilized, and things will keep moving in a bad cycle. And the other conundrum for the Saudis when it comes to the Syrian-Israeli relationship, I want to highlight that for the Saudis, since the Arab Peace Initiative, 2002, early 2000s, they always wanted to be the leading player on the relationship or normalization or peace with Israel. And they've been losing that one piece by the other during the Abraham Accords. And now for the Saudis, they want an agreement between Syria and Israel but they would also have Syria as part of the group that would normalize when Riyadh normalizes with Israel. Otherwise, their leverage would be less, and their role as a leading regional player, leading Arab player, leading Muslim player will be weakened. So I think they would encourage an understanding or some sort of agreement between Syria and Israel, but they would rather have the normalization happen, if it is to happen, when the Saudis actually reach an agreement with Israel.
All right. Unfortunately, we've reached the end of today's webinar. Thank you to our audience for attending and for the great questions, and a huge thank you to our speakers, Daniel Benaim and Ibrahim Al-Assil, for their time and valuable insights. We got to break news on this webinar, and it was a pleasure speaking to both of you. So thank you both very, very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.